Thomas is a remarkable woman, and she has done all the things, right? She's been on so many lists, Time 100, Ebony 100, on CNN, on ABC. She's written a book. She's working on her second. She has a remarkable resume, and she really has a clarion voice about how to protect the earth, how to be an advocate for the earth, and how to build community. So Leah, thank you for being with us. Please join me in conversation. Yeah, thank you. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I know you have some friends.
Hi, Ray.
In the audience. So you and I have shared that we are both from the Midwest.
Yes.
I grew up in Cleveland, you in St. Louis, and that we're really proud of that. And I'd love to go back to like young Leah and hear a little bit about what it was in your early days that led to who you are now.
Yeah, I am also the thing that I'm trying to get people to do that they probably won't do. It's like a little MW for the Midwest. So I'm trying to make that cool. I'm struggling. But yeah, I mean, I had a really Midwestern upbringing. Like we had fireflies and I just loved watching them, and I would show my mom the little toads that I was catching, and I think she thought like there's something odd going on here. So yeah, she really pushed me towards just learning about environmentalism and biology, and yeah, I really enjoyed growing up in Missouri and kind of the slower pace of life. I think that's why I really resonated with Santa Barbara and Carpinteria when I lived here. But I think Midwestern values are just such a beautiful thing, and just the kindness and the intention a lot of people have in community. And I think I carry that with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say that what I love about California is the dreamer aspect and the entrepreneurial aspect. And if you marry that with this community orientation and kindness and sort of doing what you say you'll do, it's a really nice mix.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to just put this front and center before we get too much further along, but this is Leah's first book, Intersectional Environmentalist. If you don't have it, it's at Chaucer's, just saying. But just unpack for us this word that you coined, which is intersectional environmentalist.
Yeah, so I was really fascinated by intersectional feminism and intersectional theory, which was created by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and is really inspired by Black feminist theory and Black women just trying to examine, especially during the Civil Rights Movement in particular, there were a lot of Black women who wanted to be a part of the feminist movement and also the Civil Rights Movement at the same time, and were kind of looking at those overlaps in their identity and trying to say, like, where's the safe space for me? So I think intersectional theory is so beautiful, especially because it's born from feminism, and as women, we're such dynamic human beings, whether it's our racial identity, our cultural identity, geography, being from the Midwest, religion, spirituality, whatever it is, that intersects with our womanhood and kind of how we navigate the world around us and how the world experiences us. So when I learned about intersectional feminism, I thought, this is so cool, because in some feminist spaces, you'll hear people say, well, we're all women, we don't have to talk about race or this or that or the other. But I want to flip that on its head, because that's such a beautiful thing, to be in community with different people and see them as their full selves. And then you can say, okay, we're all women, but it's so beautiful that we're different. So when I found that, I felt like I could finally participate in the feminist movement, because I didn't have to silence parts of my identity. So I wanted to apply intersectional theory to environmentalism, which I feel like it was already applied in so many environmental justice spaces, but when I was studying environmental science and policy, when I was working in corporate sustainability, environmental justice and the intersections of social justice and environmentalism was often siloed as kind of this extra add-on to mainstream environmentalism, to conservation, to all those sorts of things. So I thought, okay, let's just call it intersectional environmentalism. I want to be an environmentalist that doesn't ignore social justice, that doesn't ignore housing inequality, prison reform, all of these other things that connect back to Mother Earth. So I use social media of all places to write what I defined intersectional environmentalism as. And I couldn't have expected that like millions of people around the world would say, oh, cool, yeah, I want to be that. What is it exactly? So I've just been trying to work with people who have been doing this work for a really long time to show people the importance of protecting people and the planet, and to also examine who is the most impacted by environmental hazards.
Beautiful. Talk a little bit about the reaction to your book. Just what was that journey when it came out, and sure, probably accolades, confusion, questions. Just talk about that whole range.
It was scary, the whole process. So I used to work at Patagonia in Ventura, so that's what brought me over here. And I was at kind of a crossroads where I could go back to Patagonia, and I love them dearly, and kind of help them with their DEI strategies. Or I could step out on my own, not knowing what I was doing, and try to create an organization on Instagram, of all places. My parents were so deeply confused, but I told them. But my dad was so sweet, and he bought the domain name intersectionalenvironmentalist.com on GoDaddy. Really? And I told him, I was like, I'm never going to use that, Dad. Like, Instagram is the future, but of course now we're a nonprofit. We have a website, we make resources. So I decided to just go out on my own and see what I could do. And during 2020, it was a very interesting time for Black authors specifically. And at the time, I think I was 25 or 26, and I had published different articles or research papers and things like that. But a book, I didn't think that was something that I could do, but I had the opportunity to do so because, again, the publishing industry, which is very white and also very male, especially in the environmental space, was finally saying, okay, are there Black writers who can write about anti-racism? Everybody wants to learn about it. So I did kind of, I feel very privileged to, during that time, have a literary agent and people to guide me through the process, and I was able to write my first book at 25. But again, I really wanted to write a textbook. I wanted to write the textbook that I really wish I had as an environmental science student freshman, to just learn the basics of what is intersectional theory, what does social justice or median income or racial justice have to do with environmental hazards. So I thought if I could have this, rainbow environmental fairy come down to my freshman year environmental science self, what would it look like, and how can I include as many people as possible that have been doing this work before me, because everything I do, I want to do it in community. So I knew it was such an incredible privilege as a 25-year-old Black woman to write a book. So I wanted to take as many people as I could with me. So there's about 25 contributors in the book, everyone from Jose Gonzalez, who founded Latino Outdoors, to people like Patty Gonia, the outdoor drag queen, to also some of the environmental justice OGs who have been doing this work since the 80s. And it's really an introduction to intersectional environmentalism, and kind of my way as a 25-year-old to say, I'm here and I deserve to take up space. So,
Yeah, well, I think that, you say that you were so fortunate to work with a publisher and all of this, but the fact is, if you didn't have something really valuable and credible to say, that wouldn't have moved forward. So, yes, it was helpful to have a publisher, but you also had something very valid and credible to say, and it was that mix that produced this. I mean, when you talk about the textbook, the toolkit at the back, I think is fantastic, because it's just like, if you need a go-to on where to start, how to go deep, how to get educated, it just walks you right through. Yeah, so I think it's accessible part.
Thank you. I think my favorite part of the toolkit, there's a woman, her name is Vernice Miller Travis, or Vernice Travis Miller, one of the two, and she has been doing environmental justice research since the 80s, and it was really funny. She messaged me on Twitter and was like, who are you? Where did you come from? I've been talking about this for a really long time. And then also at the same time, the father of environmental justice, Dr. Robert Bullard, who I base so much of my work around.
Yes.
He also messaged me on Twitter and was like, "I've written 16 books. Who are you?" And it was such a funny moment because I'm like, these are so many people I look up to.
Luminaries.
And they're looking at me and saying, "Girl, who are you?
Right.
Where are you from?" Like, so
you just arrived.
Yeah. And in the back of the textbook, and I met them and I talked to them and everything was all good. But instead of taking that moment and kind of shrinking away, I worked with Bernice, who curated a book list because she kept telling me, like, the youngins need to know we've been around. I'm like, you're right. So Bernice's toolkit and bookshelf is in the back of the book. And I think it's just, I think intergenerational partnership is just so important. And I think that's probably my favorite part of the toolkit. And our Twitter beef is so funny, especially now because it wasn't really beef, but
yeah. So I think what's interesting about that is that you are an expert communicator. And I mean, it's something that you studied, but it's obviously something that you have just really exceptional talent in that area. And you have married the two. Talk a little bit about, because it's like, are you a communicator first and an environmentalist second? Environmentalist first? Not that it has to be either or, but the combination is so powerful.
Thank you. I think I wanted to be a communications major, but my mom is very traditional and said I needed to get a science degree if I came to California. So
that was your deal?
Yeah, she really wanted me to be a doctor. That was kind of her dream for me. So I tricked her. I was like, well, it's a bachelor in science of environment. So, but I wanted to be a comms person, a writer. I've been kind of freelance writing since I was in college. And then I just realized the environmental movement really had a communications problem. And there's also a lot of academic elitism sometimes in the environmental space where people are like, you need to understand what we're talking about, or enough people aren't taking action. And then sometimes people can kind of get up on this little high horse and look down at people without realizing it's not that they don't care. Maybe they're working a 60-hour work week, or maybe, they care about putting food on the table. So I really wanted to do what I could to just make what I was learning as accessible as possible, kind of like Ray mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Who's so lovely. But yeah, I wanted to do whatever I could. So I started my social media channel, which some people at the time also weren't a fan of, because I guess being an eco content creator is kind of a new thing. And then I started writing whoever would listen. So Playboy, I just spoke at Coachella. Wherever I can talk to people about environmentalism, I'll show up. So that's what eco communications is. I really want to meet people where they're at, talk to them about environmentalism in a way that really resonates with them, because the climate crisis is so urgent, environmental injustice is so urgent, and I think we need as many people talking about it and feeling as invited to the movement as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Hear, hear, right? So you had talked about, obviously, the intersection with gender. You and I are both involved in Daughters for Earth, which is a fund and movement focused on celebrating, mobilizing, and funding restoration and protection of Earth for the women-led efforts. And you, as we talked earlier, are really thinking a lot about Afrofeminism and Mother Earth, and some of these themes about that are sort of intersecting around women, feminism, this mothering identity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. It's funny, I would say intersectional environmentalism so much, and I would get people that would come to me and say, isn't this just ecofeminism? Like, well, yeah, intersectional ecofeminism, it's basically the same thing. But I initially didn't identify with ecofeminism, and maybe it was just how it was taught to me in the beginning. And for those who aren't familiar, ecofeminism is there's radical ecofeminism, cultural ecofeminism. It's the exploration of women and the environment. Sometimes how women are treated is connected to how the environment is treated. So if you're in a society that degrades women, they often degrade the environment. And then after kind of fighting that title for a long time, someone, I guess, made a Wikipedia page for me, and it says Leah Thomas, ecofeminist, in the parentheses. So I started realizing so much that I do is because of my womanhood and my intersectional feminism and feminist practice. And I think it was so lovely to hear so many people say Mother Earth and Mother Nature, because I started wondering, like, why do we call the Earth Mother Earth? So the next project that I'm working on is an exploration of that and going through mythology and how we are where we are today. And it's so wild. There's hundreds of Mother Earth kind of figures, centuries and centuries of history of people kind of coming to the same conclusion of relating the earth with the feminine and just exploring, like, what are the implications of that. So that's the next project that I'm working on, and I'm in the proposal stage. It's a long process, but it feels really good, and I'm not a mother yet, but I hope to be. So for this project, I'd love to talk to lots of mothers, including you. You're on the...
Okay, super. We'll talk. Yeah. But as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking that, you know, Sunday is Mother's Day. And, you know, as we're all, I mean, not all of us have our mothers with us. Not all of us have, you know, positive relationships. So it can sometimes be a challenging day. But if we are to think on Sunday about Mother Earth and just pause to think about what do we think about Mother Earth, our relationship, it just would be an interesting little meditation that we could all do on that day that's really just 5 or 6 days away.
I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, you know, when we talk about Santa Barbara and the environment, many people are so proud that Earth Day started in Santa Barbara. And when we think about environmentalism in the 70s, it was very much about place, you know, environment and animals, I would say. That was sort of how it was framed. And we have moved to expand thinking when we think about the environment, really to be all living beings, and that people are very much a part of that picture. Talk a little bit more about how you center people in your work. And I know that you've gotten some pushback about it. So just share a little bit about that with us.
Ooh, so many things. Well, one, I think what you mentioned, and just briefly to talk about philanthropy and put things in perspective. So conservation-based environmental work receives the majority of funding. That's definitely changing, and, you know, shout out to the Sierra Club. They've had like a mailing list they really know what they're doing, and they've been doing it for a long time. So I understand it. Like you said, a lot of organizations that the momentum of the Earth Day movement, they have a really strong base of people, but didn't necessarily prioritize people in the process as well. And I understand that. There's a bit of escapism to that as well. Like if we can envision nature and the wilderness as something that we go to, or that's the thing that we can protect, you can kind of escape a little bit and not necessarily think about your day-to-day reality and just think about, like, nature is so beautiful. And it is. But, I mean, our homes, our communities, our cities, that's also part of nature and an ecosystem. And I think I've been trying to recontextualize that within my environmental practice. To go back to the first thing. So because organizations like Big Green, the Sierra Club, WWF, PETA, are some of the most funded in the environmental space, I think it's less than 5% of philanthropic funds in the environmental space specifically goes to environmental justice-based work. So those are the people who are trying to make sure Flint, Michigan doesn't happen again and people don't have lead in their water, the people trying to ensure there are community gardens and green spaces and all those sorts of things. So I think we definitely should be focusing on environmental justice as well. And I think there's pushback again because when people think of, and I've struggled with this as an environmentalist when it comes to harm kind of caused to marginalized communities, it's easier to think about, I want to protect the whales and I want to protect the penguins, because to some people they feel innocent. And again, there's a bit of escapism. But when it comes to protecting people, sometimes there is an empathy gap where people might say, well, can't they just move out of Flint, Michigan? Or can't they, if there's a, don't live next to a toxic waste site or facility?
Was that a choice?
Yeah, is it a choice? So I think that is some of the complication and disconnect when it comes to encouraging people to protect people on the planet at the same time. But I think something that helps is I always encourage people to think about the who in addition to the what. And there's no environmental issue that exists without a who. So if you're talking about a polluted waterway, let's fix it. Not just for the salmon, but also thinking about, are there fishermen that rely on, you know, their livelihood because of this waterway, or their surrounding communities, that if this is contaminated, it's contaminating them, or they're farmers at this polluted waterway. So I think always asking the who in addition to the what, and the what is the environmental problem, that'll really help root people in environmental justice.
Okay, who and the what? Easy. We're going to open up to questions in 1 second, but I want to touch on art. Because you have such a cool offering called Earth Sessions, which you can talk a little bit more about, but just broadly talking about the role of art when it comes to connection with the environment.
I love art. I have a very eccentric grandmother. Her name's Janice. She's featured on my Instagram sometimes. She was a teacher. She has like hundreds of giraffe statues in her house. She's very unique. But I think that made me have an appreciation of art because I think artists are just such an incredible vehicle for positive change. Like even listening to the song, like the Marvin Gaye song, What's Going On, you can listen to it and just vibe. But then when you're thinking about the time and why he wrote that song, it was kind of collectively everybody was wondering, like, what is going on? There's the civil rights movement, we've got the Vietnam War, like what's happening? So I think artists can play such an incredible role of just kind of speaking cultural consciousness out loud in one streamlined message. So I think we're living in a time like that right now where a lot of people have so many question marks, and I think artists of various mediums can do a great job of comforting people and making them feel seen, and then also encouraging them to take action. And when we started Intersectional Environmentalists, the first people who kind of supported us were artists. We had visual artists saying, can we make graphics for you?
That's right.
We had artists that were saying, can I make my Spotify art when the song pops up a line about the importance of intersectional environmentalism? So I just thought, like, how could we work with artists to actually connect people to grassroots environmental orgs in their neighborhood? So that's where Earth Sessions was born, because I love The Art of Gathering, which is a great book, and I thought I didn't just want to be online, I wanted to get to people in person. So they show up at an Earth Sessions, they get a free book. We have a bunch of free books. We entice them with a musician, and then they end up walking away knowing a local grassroots environmental justice org and learning a little bit about those issues in kind of a joyful way.
What'll it take to bring Earth Sessions to Santa Barbara?
Ooh. I would love to. We just did 2 events in the Bay Area. One at Cal Academy of the Sciences, which was so fun. We gave away like 400 books, which was amazing. And we're trying to come back to LA, so we're trying to, we'll figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's coming.
Any questions for Leah? Yes, Flavia.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for your words, for your work. It's very inspiring. My question is, how do you fight if you had some imposter syndrome in the past, writing a book about the environment? Because as a woman of color myself, I know that there are not a lot of others like us. There are a few others, and it's getting better each day. But still, this is, I would say, like not my main reference of an author, like an expert on climate. So I wonder, how did you do it? And especially because you were so young back then.
Yeah, first of all, I can't wait.
And still.
Yeah, thank you. I can't wait to read your book whenever it comes out. So, like, congrats for starting the journey in the first place. That's the first step, is just starting. I still sometimes struggle with imposter syndrome, but then I think there's a lovely line by Dr. Maya Angelou, the author and poet, where she said, so she's incredible. Like, she's written so many bodies of work that everybody loves, and still at the height of her career, she said, sometimes I'm just afraid that someone's going to pull a curtain and say, gotcha, like you're not supposed to be here. So when I read that from her, I understood it's totally fine. And I'm sure so many other people might feel that, but you deserve to be there. And this might be, controversial, but we're mostly women here. There are so many mediocre men who write books, and there's so many books by men who don't ask that question. They just believe they're qualified to write the thing. So I would say write the thing, channel the confidence of a mediocre man and write that book.
You heard it here, Flavia. Any other thoughts, questions, reflections? Yes, Ray.
I have one, so I'm sitting down now. But, well, first of all, obviously, you just deserve all the honor in the world because you're an incredible person. And just specifically, you have allowed me to have an articulation for a lot of ideas and feelings mostly that I had for decades. Mm-hmm. And before I knew you, I, gathered so much from you, and that articulation has taken me places. So just your work just helps so many people. But now I'm going to talk about being an influencer.
Yeah.
Because that really matters. And, knowing you, Leah, it wasn't the intention, right? It was accidental, just kind of is how it worked in COVID lockdown. You gave your thoughts away and people ate them up, and you started a revolution on social. And I have 2 social media questions for you. The first is that for anyone who follows Leah and her organization, they're 2 different accounts, right? There's Leah Thomas and there's Intersectional Environmentalist. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what that feels like for you, because you pour your energy towards IE, and yet what it looks like to me is that people adore you, the face of it. And so I'm kind of curious, how do you, how does that make sense in your mind, and does it even matter? And then the second question is a little bit of an easier one, but it's about brand partnerships. Yeah. Because I'll speak from the perspective of what do they call it, a geriatric millennial? Who invented social media, right? It was my people who invented it, and we invented it to be perfect. Yeah. It was okay, social media is a place that you show up perfectly, right? When we invented Facebook and Instagram, it was if your photo is not perfect, and if your brand identity isn't always perfect, you're canceled. Yeah. And that doesn't leave space for getting paid. I think taking a brand deal that might not be obviously connected to the environment, but pays the bills so you can work to support the environment. So I'm just curious about your philosophy on that.
Yeah, I think, okay, where should I start? Okay, so the first question, I'll start with the second one, and I'll come back to the first one. So the second one has been really, I'll start with the first one, just for my brain. Yeah, that was really intentional, because when I was going viral for the post that talked about what intersectional environmentalism was, it was really scary, again, as a reserved, kind of awkward 20-something, where all of a sudden people were coming to me as a person. And prior to that, Green Girl Leah, I posted about acai bowls. I posted about just hikes, wildflowers, beekeeping, those sorts of things. So I really wanted to create a boundary that I, as an individual, am not a constant resource. So even now, I love when people, sometimes professors will be I love that post you posted about environmental racism, followed up by the pickling recipe. And it's just fun, because that's me as a person, and that's what the platform is. So Intersectional Environmentalist, it's always the idea, it has way more followers than I do, such higher engagement. I pop up on there sometimes, but there's a team of people that are behind it. So I wanted to make sure there was a specific resource that I could direct people to, and a team of people. But it is interesting that, and the people who want to just follow me in particular can follow me. I think it's also, I love it when people are like, oh, I love intersectional environmentalists, like, who are you? And I actually don't mind that, because if they're following the resources, it's not super important, like who I am. I just want them to get the knowledge. But that was intentional, because that distinction and the emotional labor, and I wanted to be able to be in the culture space. Like, there's a lot of random things that I do in music, etc., that wouldn't necessarily live on an intersectional environmentalist. So I think having that personal platform is really, really important, and is a way for me to protect my boundaries. And then with brand partnerships, that's a question that comes up a lot and is super valid. I think the big intersectional environmentalist was funded for the first year from brand partnerships, because as 20-somethings, I remember meeting up with you in the early days, like, how do we fund an org? And everybody who started it, they were all environmental content creators. And we just thought, okay, this might be a way where, okay, you're telling me if I hold a bar of organic soap, they'll like donate to intersectional environmentalists. And I think the way that I've been able to think about it is, it's kind of like podcasts have ads, TV shows have ads, and thinking about my social media channel kind of as its own little newspaper or magazine. But I do have specific brand guidelines and things and people who I'll work with. And I think as my account has gotten a little bit bigger, which I think shouldn't be a privilege and should exist for everyone, I can usually talk to brands about, okay, this is what feels good to say. Can you, if I do this, can you actually donate to intersectional environmentalists or donate to this organization? And then I think from those brand partnerships, it's also been able to turn into consulting opportunities or other things like that. But it's definitely something I've thought about and can be really controversial in this space as well. But I think at the base of it, not even just me, like, I want activists to be compensated for their work. That's another issue where I've had activists, youth activists, say they're speaking at, Verizon, and they're not getting paid, or different things like that. Not okay. So I think it was an interesting funding model for us. Now, of course, we're applying for grants and not relying on holding soap or like eco-friendly products. But I think it is, and I also want to show people that content creation is a legitimate career. It's new, but there are a lot of educators who are online, and I want to show them how they can get paid. So whether that's offering different courses, doing brand partnerships, how they can get into consulting, the importance of getting paid for their likeness. I think there are a lot of influencers. I know people who have been in commercials for brands with billions and billions of dollars, and their transportation was paid for. They're running in ads on YouTube and on TV, but they're not being compensated. So that's something that I've been trying to figure out and navigate for sure.
Mm-hmm. Do we maybe have one more question? Joy? Oh, we have a few more questions. Okay.
I'm curious where some of your current growing edges might be.
Ooh, my growing edges. And that's my first time hearing that. I like that. So things that can you explain that? Like, kind of like, is that like an arch?
Where you're stretching yourself.
Ooh, I stepped into a board position at Intersectional Environmentalist, and I've never technically been an employee of the organization. I've just been like a founder running around like, let's do this, and having all these ideas. But it's the first time that I'm not closing a chapter, but I'm a part of a board of directors, and I'm not in the day-to-day operations. And this thing that started out really grassroots now has a board and a strategic plan and all those sorts of things. So I knew nothing about nonprofit finance and philanthropy and applying for government grants. So I think that's where I'm really growing, just trying to navigate that, and then also allow a project that I created to breathe on its own and empower new leadership to come into play. We're going to be hiring an executive director, but it feels right. It's really difficult. Budgets, nonprofit budgets are so difficult. And I think I'm just asking myself, like, who do I want to be? Like Ray mentioned earlier, I spent so much energy creating Intersectional Environmentalist, the platform, and then just posting random things on my own personal platform. And now having the opportunity to say, like, who am I as a person? does it have to be Green Girl Leah? Can I just be Leah Thomas? And like, who is that exactly? What do I stand for? So I think going into this new chapter, especially my next book, isn't going to be called The Intersectional Environmentalist, where everybody can associate it with the nonprofit. So yeah, there's that imposter syndrome that pops up of like, who am I outside of this thing that I created that I'll always be a part of, but you know, what's next? So I'm on that journey right now.
Let's honor these 2 questions and then we'll wrap up.
Really quickly, so being in the public eye, I'm an influencer and an author, like, what has been the biggest pushback that you've experienced outside of maybe the classic environmentalist pushbacks that we've probably all experienced?
Oh yeah. I think there's a lot of people, just a lot of question marks of legitimacy, which I think again goes with elitism. So there's some people, the question of, why are you here? Are you qualified to be speaking on this? First of all, yes. But even if I didn't have an environmental science degree or all these sorts of things, anyone should be able to talk about if there's lead in the water or, you know, what's going on in their community. So I think that's been pushed back. I think a lot of people, and they might just be trolling, they might say things like, trees aren't racist, like, this is the woke agenda, or whatever they say on my page. But those are outliers, so I think that's pushback. I think there's a lot of confusion of using social media for movement building, and I try to tell people, you know, social media isn't the end goal. I want people to take action, I want them to vote, I want them to get connected to an organization and do something. But sometimes for some people, social media might be the end goal that day. And I want people, I hope they can be okay with that. Like if a person that day just gets to watch, they have 2 minutes to watch a funny TikTok about lead in water, I want them to do that. And maybe that day they didn't donate, but even if it's 100 days from now, they donate and they get active, I think that's such a beautiful thing. So there's a lot of pushback about social media and how it can be used, but I've talked to so many teachers in K through 12 or in colleges that are saying, okay, I use these resources to speak to my students. I know they're watching TikTok. Please don't ban it. I know that they're watching TikTok. So, you know, I want people to be able to find educational resources on social media platforms, but lots of pushback about that.
Eva?
How did you start speaking out about the environment and starting your work? Was it through like starting your social platforms and posting about it, or through something else?
Honestly, I feel like posting about it really helped kind of make some noise. And even when I had like 500 followers, I would, you know, at the time, again, I was posting a lot about acai, and I was vegan at the time. I'm not anymore, sorry. But yeah, I think social media really empowered me to speak out a little bit more as kind of a shy person, but I really wasn't active in environmental activism in college. I was studying environmental science, involved in social justice activism. I wouldn't have even called myself an environmentalist until after working at Patagonia. Like looking back, obviously I was a park ranger, like I was doing all of these things. But I started speaking out about it, and then I just never stopped. I was kind of like the shy kid that nobody listened to, and then someone listened to me on social media, and then I just kept talking. But I think social media really helped me start speaking out, and then I felt more comfortable to speak out in places outside of social media, so in the workplace, at schools, different things like that. It's a great question, thank you.
Keep speaking up. I know you will. We all know you will. There's no stopping. But Leah, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And please feel free to stay. Yeah.